All right, everybody, we're on DAF Pei Amid Aleph. It's about 11 lines down. The word is itmar. Itmar. Now, we're talking about an opinion. There was an opinion that was that was voiced in the previous DAF that says that if the Jewish people are half and half, in other words, we know that if the majority of Klal Yisrael is Tameh, then when they bring the Korban Pesach B'tumah. They don't wait till Pesach Sheni, they just bring it B'tumah. The question is, what if they're half and half? So the Brisa had said that if they're half and half, at least according to one opinion, the Chachamim, the half that are Tameh bring it separately, and the half that are Tahor bring it separately. In other words, the people who are Tahor can't get mixed up with the people who are Tameh. They have to retain their Tahara. When the majority of Klal Yisrael is Tameh, so then everyone can bring it together, and we don't concern ourselves with segregating the people who are Tameh from the people who are Tahor. Okay, so the statement is, Hayu Yisrael mechzet Tahor and mechzet Tamehin. If they're half and half, so Amar Rav, Mitamin echad mehen b'sheretz. So Rav says that in that case, if they're exactly half and half, we should take one guy who's Tahor and expose him to a sheretz. Here, see? Take this dead lizard. Okay, so the Gemara says, Vamai, ni avdu hani lichudayo v'hani lichudayo. What's wrong with doing the eitzah of having the half of let the half do separately, the other half do separately? Daha Amar Rav, halala osin la'atzman, v'halala osin la'atzman. Rav himself had subscribed to that position that each group, each 50% does its own Korban Pesach. So Amri Hacha b'mayaskinan kigon shahayu tamehin otfen ala tahorin echad. The answer is, says the Gemara, that we're talking about a case where it wasn't exactly let's say you have 10,000 people. It wasn't that 5,000 were Tahor and 5,000 were Tameh. It was that 5,001 were Tameh and 4,999 were Tahor. So the Gemara says, Yihachi havelhu ruba tameim, niavdu kulhu betuma. Well, if that's the case, then the majority are Tameh. So then everyone should be able to do it together in the state of Tumah. So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Eliezer ben Masya, Damar Heina Yachid Machriyas Atzibur L'Tumah. It's because Rav holds like Rabbi Eliezer ben Masya that we had seen yesterday, who says that one person is not sufficient to tip the scales and constitute a majority of Tameh people. He based it on a pasuk at the top of the Amid, where the Torah says, Lo sucha lismoch es ha-pasach be'achad she'arecha. You're not allowed to offer the Pesach or to slaughter the Pesach with one of your gates. So with one is read as with one person. In other words, one person can't be the deciding factor as to whether Klal Yisrael will get to do the Korban Pesach in a state of Tumah or not. It has to be that there's more than just one person. And that's why you have to be metame another person so that there'll be two in the majority instead of just one. So ihachi hadar kushin l'duchteini abdu hani l'chudayo v'hani l'chudayo. So the Gemara says, well, then your question is back. According to what Rav had said, that as long as you have half and half, each group can work separately. The group that's Tameh will do it b'tumah. The group that's Torah will do it b'tahara. So if you just have the case of 5,001 versus 4,999, so then that's tantamount to half and half. Let's let each group just work separately instead of being matame another guy with the sheretz. So elahachi ka'amar i'ikatana desavr la kitana kama da'amar palgu palga lo avdi kulhu b'tumah v'savr la karebi Yehuda da'amar ein korban sibur choluk mitamin echad mehen b'sheretz. What Rav means is as follows. He says, let's say we could find a Tana who subscribes to both the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim of the Brisa from yesterday. The Brisa had said that when you have half and half, then half and half is not tantamount to a majority of Tumah. So half and half is not the same halacha. Rabbi Yehuda of the Brisa had also made a statement, and his statement was that when you're dealing with a communal korban like the Korban Pesach, you're not allowed to have one segment of Klal Yisrael doing one thing and the other segment of Klal Yisrael doing the other thing. If we're in this together. So you can't have half of Klal Yisrael doing it in a state of Tumah and half of Klal Yisrael doing it in a state of Tahara. So here's the dilemma. You could theoretically find an opinion who holds that when it's half and half, it doesn't have the halacha of being a majority. So there, the compelling argument is really half should do it b'tumah, half should do it b'tahara. But on the other hand, you hold like Rabbi Yehuda, who says you can't split up Klal Yisrael, and everyone's got to be doing it in the same way. So therefore, what's the remedy according to that opinion? Be mitame, one guy who's tohar with a sheretz, he'll tip the scales so that now you have a majority. And once you have a majority of people who are tummy, everyone is in the same boat. Now everyone will bring it in a state of tumah.
But didn't he just say that one isn't enough?
So he says, even if you hold that one is enough, be matami another guy.
Two of them. Is this really the same argument? It's just one guy's deciding that one is enough.
Exactly. Okay, so that was Rab's eitzah of being matami a guy with a sheretz. V'ula amar mishalchen echad mehem l'derech rechoka. Ula says that what you should do is instead of being matami the guy, just send him on his way far away. Send one person who's tohar far away, and then that will constitute the majority of tumeim.
It's like we said a kohen when we were trying to.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So now the Gemara says v'yitame enu b'sheretz. So frak the Gemara. Why doesn't Ula subscribe to Rab's solution, which is to make one guy who's tohar tummy with a sheretz? Kesavar shochlin v'zarkan al tumei sheretz. Because Ula holds that just because a person has tumah sheretz does not preclude him from bringing the korban pesach. He could find a shaliach to bring his korban pesach on his behalf. So it really is, he's still considered to be tohar vis-a-vis the korban pesach. So the Gemara says v'yitama enu b'meis. So okay, fine. So then, so don't subscribe to the solution of using a sheretz, but expose him to a corpse. So. And that way you'll have a majority of Tumeim. So the Gemara says, Medacheu ata mechagigaso. That's not a good solution because then the remedy is worse than the illness because what you've done now is not only have you may have allowed now everyone to bring the Korban Pesach, but now you've precluded this guy from being able to bring his Korban Chagiga. Remember, there's a Korban Chagiga that you have to bring on the first day of the Yontif. And you can't bring that b'tumah, even when the majority of Klal Yisrael is tumah, you can't bring that. So he's not going to agree to that, to be precluded from a korban chagiga. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, hashnami medacheu atami pischa. But 1 second, says the Gemara, by making, if you send this guy out of town, why is that any better? You're precluding him from bringing a korban pesach. Why is he going to agree to that more readily than not being able to bring his chagiga? Answers the Gemara, Efshir David B'Sheni, because you'll reassure him you can always bring the korban Pesach on Pesach Sheni. Don't worry about it. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, B'Meis Nami Efshir David B'Shvi Dahavale Shmini Shalo. But 1 second, if a guy is exposed to Tumas Meis, you can always reassure him that don't worry, even though you can't bring the korban Chagiga today because we made you Tameh before Pesach. But by the last day of Pesach, you'll be able to be Tohar, because that will be the 8th day of your purification, since you became Tameh on Erev Pesach, and you're Tameh for 7 days, so the 7th day of Pesach will be the day after your Tumah is over, and you'll be able to bring the Korban Chagiga then, because we know that you have Tashlumin, you have the ability to make up the Chagiga. If you didn't bring it on the first day, you bring it on the second. If you didn't bring it on the second, you bring it on the third. You can bring it all the way up to the 7th day. So the Gemara says, "Kesavar ula kulu tashlumin and derishaninu dechazi berishan chazi bekulu v'chol heichad lo chazi berishan lo chazi bekulu." So the Gemara answers because Ula is of the opinion that the main mitzvah of Korban Chagiga is on the day 1 of the Yontif, and only people who are obligated to bring the Korban Chagiga on day 1, if they neglect to do so, have to bring it on subsequent days of the Yontif. But this fellow who's tamei on the first day of Pesach, since he's now halachically potter from bring the korban chagiga on day 1, even if he makes himself tohar later, will be exempt from bringing the korban chagiga, won't be able to bring the korban chagiga, and therefore you've made him lose his mitzvah. And that's why Ula is not happy with that solution. Sir Amalahu Rav Nachman Zilu v'imru le'ula man sayas da'arka sichei umashkane v'rohit. Rav Nachman was critical of Ula's solution of sending the guy out of town. He says, who's going to listen to you? Who's going to pick up his tent and his tent pegs and just run away? I mean, that's not a practical solution. To find a guy who's going to be willing to do that, who's going to want to be able to do that? I mean, who's going to want to just pick up and leave Yerushalayim like that? So Itmar, how Yeruban Zavin Umiyutan Tmei Mesim. Now, by the way, the Gemara up until now has been working under the premise that even if the majority of Klal Yisrael are Tameh, then there is an opportunity for makeup on Pesach Sheni. We're actually going to reject that momentarily. That the remedy of Pesach Sheni is only available when the Jewish people did not bring the Korban Pesach B'tumah. But if they brought the Korban Pesach B'tumah, then Pesach Sheni is not employed for that year. But let's go on. Hayuruban Zavin Umiutan Tamei Mesim. You have a majority of people who are Zavin. Let's say 51% of the population has Tumas Zav, and 25% of them have Tumas Meis. So you have a majority of Klal Yisrael who are Tameh, but they have different kinds of Tumah. So Amar Rav, Osan Tmei Meisim, Einon Osan Lo Barishon V'lo B'Sheni. So he says the people who have Tumas Meis cannot bring the Korban Pesach in the first Pesach. They cannot bring the Korban Pesach in Pesach Sheni either. Rishon Lo Avdi, Dahavu Miuta, Umiuta Lo Avdi, Barishon. He says they can't bring the Korban Pesach in the first Pesach because they comprise a minority. And only when you have a majority of people of Tumas Meis are you allowed to bring the Korban Pesach in a state of Tumah. Tumas Zav is not enough of a Tumah, or it's not, in other words, the Torah doesn't grant the suspension of Tumah for Tumas Zav. It only grants the suspension of Tumah for Tumas Meis. And since you don't have a majority of people with Tumas Meis, we can't suspend the Tumah and allow them to bring the Korban Pesach B'tumah and Pesach Rishon. B'sheni nami lo avdi, kol heicha da avdi tzibur b'rishon, avid yachad b'sheni. Kol heicha da lo avdi tzibur b'rishon, lo avid yichad b'sheni. And they can't bring it on Pesach Sheni. Why is that? Because the only time that there's an institution of Pesach Sheni was when Klal Yisrael brought their Korban Pesach and Pesach Rishon. If the majority of Klal Yisrael could not bring their Korban Pesach and Pesach Rishon, because the vast majority that were either Zavin or Tmei Mesim, so then there's no institution of Pesach Sheni for that year. Pesach Sheni only operates when the majority of Klal Yisrael brought their Korban Pesach and Pesach Rishon. Since you had 51% Zavim and another 25% who were Tmei Meis, then the majority did not bring Pesach Rishon, and therefore, ergo, there's no Pesach Sheni.
The Tamei Zvachim
Zavim
doesn't, they couldn't bring it?
If a person has Tumas Zav, he cannot bring the Korban Pesach, and even if the majority of Klal Yisrael have Tumas Zav, we don't suspend the laws of Tumah as we do with Tumas Meis. Okay, so Amar Lahu Shmuel, Zil Imru Le La'aba, the Yasu B'nei Yisrael Asa Pasach B'Moado, my Avdislei. So Shmuel says, go tell the father, meaning the Rav who had made this statement. He said, go tell him that how can you say that there's no opportunity for bring the Korban Pesach? The Torah says that they shall bring the Korban Pesach in its proper time, which is the preface to the mitzvah of Pesach Sheni. That implies that there always has to be a time for someone to bring their Korban Pesach. So Amar Lahu Zilu Imrule Ki Havu Kulhu Zavin My Avdislei Elakevin Lo Efsher Lo Efsher Hachanami Lo Efsher. So Shmuel said back, he says, what are you hacking me? He says, look, in theory, let's say the majority of Klal Yisrael were Zavin. Let's say all of Klal Yisrael were Zavin. Just they all had Tumas Zav. They can't bring the Korban Pesach and Pesach Rishon, and then game is over. They're pater. So look, he says, the pasuk which says that you have to bring the Korban Pesach in its time is only talking about when it's halachically feasible. But that pasuk doesn't say that every single year there has to be the possibility of bringing the Korban Pesach. It means whenever it's possible, you do it. Whenever it's not possible, you don't do it. And so therefore, in similar situation like over here, even though you have a significant percentage of Klal Yisrael who can still bring the Korban Pesach, but the institution of Pesach Sheni doesn't exist certain years, because if the majority didn't bring their Korban Pesach, Pesach Rishon, then the whole institution of Pesach Sheni is out the window. So Itmar, Hayuruben Tmei Mesim Umiyutam Zavim. Now let's look at the opposite case, where the majority have Tumas Meis, and the minority have Tumas Zav. So now we're going to be able to suspend Tumah and allow people to bring their Korban Pesach and Pesach Rishon, but only those people have Tumas Meis. We don't suspend the Tumah of Tumas Zav. So Ein Tashlumin La Pesach Haba B'Tumah. So that's this halacha that I was alluding to before. There is no Pesach Sheni makeup when the majority of Klal Yisrael brought the Korban Pesach in a state of Tumah. The only time that there's a makeup of Pesach Sheni is when they brought the Korban Pesach and Pesach Rishon. It was done b'tahara. V'Rav Ada bar Ahava Amar Yesh Tashlumo LePesach Haba b'Tumah. And Rav Ada bar Ahava disagrees, and he says, no, there is Pesach Sheni even when the majority brought it on Pesach Rishon b'Tumah. Nema Baha Kamiflagi. Let us suggest that their machlokas is as follows. Demanda Amar Ein Tashlum LePesach Haba b'Tumah Kesavar Tumah Duchuye Hi b'Tzibor Umanda Amar Yesh Tashlum LePesach Haba b'Tumah Kesavar Tumah Hutra b'Tzibor. Now this is a very famous machlokas. When we say that when the majority are tamei, they can bring their Korban Pesach b'Tumah, what mechanism are the rabbis working with? In other words, in explaining the Torah law? Do we say that Tumah is hudcha, which means that it is pushed aside, but it's still there? Or do we say that it's hutra, which means it's completely obliterated? Now, what's the difference between the two? When the Torah waves its magic wand and says that even though you're all tummy, you can bring your Korban Pesach, is the Torah saying you're still tummy, but we're still going to allow you to bring the Korban Pesach? Or is the Torah waving its magic wand and saying your tumah has disappeared, now go ahead and bring the Korban Pesach? What's the ramification? What difference does it make? The difference that it makes is that if we view these people as having a magic wand waved over them so that their tumah is like it's disappeared vis-a-vis the Korban Pesach, so then you have now a Korban Pesach that's being brought, so to speak, b'tahara, even though the majority are tamei, because the magic wand has removed the tumah. In which case, the institution of Pesach Sheni should still be operative. But if you understand that the tumah is hudcha, which means it's pushed to the side, but people are still tamei, it's still there, the tumah, it's not obliterated, but it's still there. So then the fact that we're allowing you to bring it in a state of tumah means that the institution of Pesach Sheni is not extant any longer, right? So that's the suggestion of the Gemara, that's what it's talui on, that's what it's dependent upon. So Amri Lo, the Gemara says no. That's a nice idea, but that could be that's not what the machlokus is about. Dekuli alma tuma dechuya b'tzibor uvahapligi. That really, I could argue that everyone holds that the tumah does not disappear, but it's still there, and we just push it to the side. But the machlokus is as follows: Mar savar tahara madchaya tuma. Tahara madchaya, tuma lo madchaya. Umar savar afilu tuma nami madchaya. The answer is that one opinion is that when the Klal Yisrael are tahor, they have the power to push all of the people who are tamei to Pesach Sheni. But when all of Klal Yisrael is tamei, they don't have enough strength, or the Korban Pesach doesn't have enough strength to push that minority who is tamei to Pesach Sheni. So therefore, a Zav would not be able to offer it on Pesach Sheni when the majority of Klal Yisrael was Tamei Tumas Meis. The other opinion is that no, once a person is not able to bring the Korban Pesach Rishon, regardless of whether the people are Tahor or Tamei, they still have the power to push that person to Pesach Sheni and allow him to have a makeup. The way that the Gemara is phrasing it, it almost sounds like that there's power within the populace themselves. There's such a powerful mitzvah that's being done by the populace that mitzvah is able to push someone off and enable them to do it in the future. And the question is, how powerful is that mitzvah that's being performed by the populace if it's being done b'tumah? And this is the machlokas. One mandomer says, no, the mitzvah is only powerful in the sense that it allows someone to bring it later if it's being brought b'tahara. And the other mandomer says, no, the mitzvah is equally as powerful because it's being brought by the populace, albeit in a state of tumah. But nevertheless, they have enough power to push all the individuals to Pesach Sheni to be able to enable them to do it. Itmar. Let's go on. Hayu shlishi son zavim ushlishi son tahorin ushlishi son tamei mesim. Now the Gemara is really I believe we could adduce the halacha of the following case from our aforementioned discussion. However, the Gemara is doing this just to be comprehensive. You have a third of the people who are zavim, another third are completely tahor, and another third have tumas meis. So here, you don't have a majority of people who are Zavim, you don't have a majority of people who have Tumas Meis, but you have a minority of people who are Zavim, a minority of people who are Tumas Meis, but if you put them together, then they constitute a majority of people who are Tamei. So, Amar Rebbe Mani Bar Patish, Osan Tumei Meisim, Einon Osan Loas Arishon, V'Loas Asheni. So the people who have Tumas Meis, unfortunately, cannot bring the Korban Pesach either on Pesach Rishon or on Pesach Sheni. Barishon lo avdi, because he dilu zaven al taharim delo avdi betuma havalei tmei mesim miyuta lo avdi barishon. He says the reason why they can't bring it in Pesach Rishon is because the Torah only allows for the bringing of the Korban Pesach betuma when the majority of the populace is Tumas Meis. So the people of Tumas Zav can join themselves with the people who are Tohar to have 66% of the people who are not Tumas Meis. You don't have a majority of Tumas Meis, and therefore you can't bring it Pesach Rishon. B'sheni lo avdi nitzrefu zavin im temei mesim lo avdi berishon havalu ruba v'ruba lo madchu lePesach Sheni. And they can't bring the Korban Pesach on Pesach Sheni either. Why? Because the only time we have the institution of Pesach Sheni is when the majority of Klal Yisrael brought it on Pesach Rishon. But since now the majority of Klal Yisrael can't bring it in Pesach Rishon, because you got a third who are Tumas Meis and a third who have Tumas Zav, and they can't bring it Pesach Rishon, so that constitutes now the majority who did not bring their Korban Pesach Rishon, and therefore there's no institution of Pesach Sheni for that year. Okay, let's go on to the next Mishnah. HaPesach shenizrak damo v'yachar kach noda shehu tamei hatzitz miratzeh. Now, here you have an interesting halacha. There are certain times when if a korban is brought in a state of tumah, the tzitz, which is the forehead plate of the Kohen Gadol, actually mitigates the tumah. Now, the word mitigate is a very vague word, but basically what it means is that the korban still works, even though the korban itself had tumah on it, and you're not allowed to introduce tumah to the Beis HaMikdash. Let's say the blood of the korban became tamei before he had a chance to do the zrika sadam. Nonetheless, if the Kohen does the zrika on the Mizbeach, the korban still works, b'di'evid, post facto. Now let's say this was true with the korban Pesach. The blood of the korban Pesach becomes a tamei, and you did the sprinkling of this blood unbeknownst to you that it was tamei, and then afterwards you discover that it was tamei. So the halacha is that tzitz, the forehead plate of the Kohen Gadol, mitigates the tumah, and the korban works. Nitma haguf einat tzitz miratza. However, if the person bringing the korban is tamei, then even if you only discover the tumah after the fact, the tzitz does not mitigate that tumah, and the korban Pesach doesn't work. And that's true whether it's the person who's owning the korban Pesach or whether it's the Kohen doing the avoda. In either case, since it was performed by someone or owned by someone who was tamei, the korban Pesach has no efficacy. Because as the rabbis taught us, both by the korban of the Nazir and the korban Pesach, a Nazir brings karbanos at the end of his Nazirism. Now, if he became tamei in the interim, before his 30-day period of Nazirism was up, he'd have to start all over again. Let's say he discovered that he was tamei before the blood was sprinkled. Only after the blood was sprinkled. In that case, he'd have to start all over again. But if we discover after the fact that the blood was tamei, and the Nazir himself was never tamei, then he doesn't have to redo the karbanos. And that's true by the korban Pesach as well. And finally, the Mishnah says, Nitma tumas hatahom hatzitz miratza, that if there's a suffix tumah that's introduced to a person, that let's say the Kohen doing the avoda walks over a cave with an opening where he walks over it, and there's a suffix whether there's a corpse in that subterraneous cave or not, and there's no way for us to verify it. So he has suffix tumah, and then he does the avoda. So there the tzitz will be maratza, there the tzitz will mitigate the tumah, even though we're dealing with tumas aguf and not tumas dam. Even though we're dealing with the person having tumah, because it's only a suffix, the tzitz will allow the tumah to be mitigated, and the korban works. So we've basically seen three halachas. Halacha number one is that the tzitz works to mitigate tumah when the blood is tamei. The tzitz does not work to mitigate tumah when the person is tamei. But the tzitz, if the person only has a suffix tumah, the tzitz will also mitigate tumah in that situation. Okay? Now let's go on to the Gemara. It seems from the language of the Mishnah that the only reason why the tzitz mitigates the tumah and allows the korban to work is because the discovery that this blood was tamei only happened after it was sprinkled. But what if you would discover that the blood was tamei before you sprinkled and you went in and sprinkled it anyway? Would the korban work? It sounds like from the language of the Mishnah that the korban would not work. So we're minhu, let's raise this a contradiction. Al mahad tzitz meratza, al hadam ve'al abasar ve'al hachelev shenitma bein b'shokig bein b'mezid bein b'onas bein b'rotzen bein b'yachid bein b'tzibor. The Brisa says that the tzitz mitigates tumah regardless of whether, and it's true for the blood or the meat that became tamei or the fat, and it doesn't make a difference whether its tumah was intentional or accidental, beknownst or unbeknownst, or whether it was an individual's korban or a community korban. And it seems from this language that even if I know that the blood is tamei, and I go b'mezid and I sprinkle it, it sounds like the tzitz is still going to mitigate the tumah, not like you just said. So the Gemara says, Amar Ravina, tum aso bein b'shogig bein b'mezid hurtza, zrikaso b'shogig hurtza b'mezid lo hurtza. The answer is you misunderstood the Brisa. The Brisa was not giving you permission to go ahead and sprinkle the blood when you know that it's tamei. The Brisa was just simply telling you that how did the blood become tamei? In the first place, if the blood became tamei through a deliberate exposure to tumah, then if inadvertently it was sprinkled afterwards, the tzitz will mitigate the tumah. But that's the mazid. The mazid being discussed by the Brisa is not the sprinkling. The mazid is the introduction of tumah to the blood. How did the blood become tummy? Even if it became tummy through a deliberate, willful act of exposing it to tumah, as long as the sprinkling was done unintentionally, then the tzitz will be maratza. The tzitz will mitigate the tumah. So that's the way you read the Brisa to make it consistent with our Mishnah. Rabbi Shilo Amar Zrikaso bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid hurtza, tumaso b'shogeg hurtza b'mezid lo hurtza. Rabbi Shilo surprisingly learns just the opposite that Raizel. He says no, just precisely the opposite. Even if you know that the dam is tamei before you sprinkle it, and you deliberately go ahead and violate the law and sprinkle tamei blood on the mizbeach, the tzitz will be maratza. The tzitz will mitigate the tumah. The only time that a deliberate act will actually sabotage your korban is if you deliberately expose the blood to tumah. In that situation, where you deliberately expose the blood to tumah, then the tzitz will not be maratza. The tzitz will not mitigate the tumah. So therefore, when the Brisa says it makes no difference whether it was intentional or unintentional, it means nitma b'shogig v'zarko bein b'shogig bein v'zarko. So then, nitma b'shogeg, it means that it became tamei unintentionally, and then v'zarko ben b'shogeg b'mezid. When we talk about it, makes no difference whether it's deliberate or unintentional. It's talking about the zrika, and then hurtza. V'hada katani dam shenizrak v'achar kach noda time of the nizrak v'achar kach noda v'noda v'achar kach nizrak lo. What is Reb Shila going to do with our Mishnah? Then our Mishnah seems to imply that the only time that this Rika will have efficacy is if I did not know that it wasn't a mazid, and according to Reb Shila, even if I do this Rika b'mazid, then the korban still works. So the Gemara says, you know, hu adin dafilu noda v'achar kach nizrak. Really, the Mishnah is not meant to be inferred that way. In reality, even if you discover that the blood is tamei before you do the zrika, and you go ahead and deliberately throw tamei blood on the mizbeach, the korban still works. V'hayde katani nizrak v'achar kach noda mishum deboy lemisni seifa. The only reason why the Mishnah said it in this particular case, where you only discover after the fact, is because it wants to tell us the case of the seifa, which is what? Nitma haguf einat tzitz miratza. That if the kohen's body becomes tamei, so then the tzitz will not mitigate the tumah, and it makes no difference over there whether he discovered it before the fact or after the fact. Afilu nizrak v'achar kach noda, that even if he only discovered after the fact that he was tamei when he did the zrika, even so, he's still not going to, the tzitz will not be meratza. So therefore, Ketani Reisha Nami, Nizrak V'achar Kach Noda. That's why the Reisha also said the case of discovery after the fact. But in reality, it makes no difference whether you discover it before the fact or after the fact, says Reb Shila. In both cases, the tzitz will be meratza when the blood is the tummy object, as long as the person is not tummy. And finally, nitma tumas hatahom v'chulei. If there's a safek tuma, if a person's in doubt whether they're tummy or not, then the tzitz will be meratza. So boy Rami bar Chama, koin ha-meratza b'karbonoseyan hutrulo tumas tahom olo. So the question is as follows. We've assumed all along that when we're talking about tumas haguf, we're talking about what person? Either the person who owns the carbon or the kohen. But that was not clear to Rami bar Chama. Rami bar Chama says, when the Mishnah says that the tzitz will mitigate the tumah of the person, are we only talking about the owner of the carbon, or are we talking about the kohen as well, who's doing the avoda? Mi amrinan ki gemiri tumas hatahom beba'olim bekohen lo gemiri, o dilma bezivche gemiri lo shna bekohen v'lo shna beba'olim. Maybe on the one hand, see this whole idea of the tzitz mitigating the tumah when a person is tameh is a halacha l'Moshe misinai. So does this Mosaic tradition only apply to the owner of the carbon but not to the kohen? Or does it apply to the carbon in toto, and therefore it makes no difference whether the safek tumah is on the guf of the owner or whether the safek tumah is on the guf of the kohen doing the avoda? So Amar Rava Toshma. So come and listen, let me try and prove it to you. The Tani Rabbi Chia lo amru tumas atahom elo lameis bilvad. That Rabbi Chia taught in a brisa that the only time that we have this din of tumas tahom, which is a safek tumah, is only by tumas meis, is only by corpse tumah. So the Gemara says, Lime'ute mai. What is that coming to exclude? Lav lime'ute tumas hatahom de sheretz. It's coming to exclude when you walk over a hole where there may be a sheretz there, and it's coming to tell you that the tzitz does not mitigate that kind of safek tumah. Uva mayaskina. So what are we talking about? Inem b'ba'olim. So maybe you're telling me where the owner of the carbon has a safek tumah sheretz upon him. Uvaman. So what kind of carbon is the brisa talking about? Ibn Nazir mi mahani be ki yamus meis alav Omar Rachmana. He says if we're talking about a Nazir, and we're saying that if the Nazir has a safek tumah, then the tzitz is meratza. But when it's a safek tumah sheretz, the tzitz is not meratza. But a Nazir, who cares if a Nazir gets exposed to a safek tumah sheretz? Even if a Nazir gets exposed to for sure tumah sheretz, it doesn't stop him from being a Nazir. The only thing that breaks the Nazirism of a Nazir is if he gets exposed to tumas meis, not if he gets exposed to tumas sheretz. So we can't be talking about breaking or invalidating the carbon of a Nazir. So ela ba'osa Pesach. So we're talking about a person who's bringing a carbon Pesach, and what the Bryce is telling me is that the tzitz is only meratza for safek tumas meis, but it's not meratza for safek tumas sheretz. Hanicha lamando amar ein shochtin v'zorken al tumei sheretz. Ela lamando amar shochtin v'zorken al tumei sheretz hashal tuma yedua hutra lo tumas tahom lo kol shekain. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. We have a machlokes whether a person who has tumas sheretz is allowed to bring the carbon pesach or not. So if you tell me that he's not allowed to bring the carbon pesach, then I can understand why the Brisa needs to make a point of saying that the tzitz is not meratza for a person who has safek tumas sheretz, and we treat him like a person who has vaday tumas sheretz. But what if you hold that a person who has tumas sheretz is allowed to bring the carbon pesach? If a person who has vaday tumas sheretz is allowed to bring the carbon pesach, then surely a person who only has a safek tumas sheretz is allowed to bring the carbon pesach. So why does the Brisa tell me that the tzitz does not work? You don't even need the tzitz in that case. A person is allowed to bring the carbon pesach for sure. So elalav bekoin. So rather, the only way to understand, to make any sense of this brisa, is that the brisa is not talking about a tumah sheretz that was introduced to the owner, but is rather talking about a safek tumah sheretz that was introduced to the kohen doing the avoda. And ushma mina hutrulo tumas atahom. And therefore, you see that that if you discover after the fact that the kohen who did the avoda had a safek tumah upon him, then his tumah is mitigated. And that's what the Bryce is coming to tell me. That even though his safek tumas meis is mitigated, his safek tumas sheretz is not mitigated. But clearly we've been able to prove from this argument, says Rava, that the Bryce, from this Bryce, we've been able to prove that the tzitz mitigates not only the tumah of the owner, but it also mitigates the suffix tumah of the kohen who's doing the avoda. So Omar Rav Yosef lo. Rav Yosef says that's not a good proof, because la'olam b'ba'olim uve'pesach ulam ute tumas hatahom deziva. So Rav Yosef says you didn't think of one possibility that the Brisa is talking about. You automatically concluded that when the Brisa says that the tzitz only mitigates a suffix tumas meis, it was coming to exclude suffix tumas sheretz. But that's not the case, as Rav Yosef. It might not have been excluding suffix tumas sheretz. It may have been excluding the suffix tuma of a zava, of a woman who has an abnormal menstrual flow. You see, she too is not permitted to bring the korban pesach, and what maybe the Bryce is telling me is that when a woman is bringing a korban pesach, if she has suffix tumas meis, then the tzitz mitigates that tumah. But if she has suffix tumas zava, then the tzitz does not mitigate that tumah. That's what the Bryce is saying. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, if that's what the Bryce is saying is v'tumas tahom dezava lo meratza, you mean to tell me that if a woman has suffix tumas zava, that suffix tumah is not mitigated? V'hatanya, let me show you a Bryce that shows you not that way. The Bryce says, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Shomeres Yom Keneged Yom, that if you have a woman who had an abnormal menses on Monday, then the halacha is that on Tuesday, which she's called a Shomeres Yom Keneged Yom, that she has to basically watch herself the entire day of Tuesday to make sure that she does not re-experience a flow. If she experiences a flow over 3 consecutive days, then she becomes what's called a Zava Gedola, and she's tummy for 7 days and will have to bring a korban at the end, okay? So she has to watch all day Tuesday to make sure that she's not having any flow. During that period, what is she? She's a suffix Zava, because we're waiting in suspense to see whether she's going to continue her flow or not. And what happens on that day, Tuesday, Sheshachtu v'zarku aleha b'sheni shala, so that it's now her second day, meaning it's the day that she's in waiting, like this Tuesday that I suggested, and they shech the korban pesach, and they do the avodah for the korban pesach on her behalf, v'achar kach ro'asa, and then after they shech the korban pesach and do the zrika, then she has another discharge. So, Eina ocheles u'petur milasus pesach sheni. So on the one hand, she's not allowed to eat the korban pesach because she's now tamei again. If she would not have had any discharge on day 2, she could have waited until evening, could have gone to the mikveh, and would have been able to eat the korban pesach. But sorry, she's had another discharge, so she can't eat the korban pesach tonight. But by the same token, however, she was still yotzei the mitzvah of korban pesach. Because why? Because, and the Gemara says, presumably the reason is, my time alav mishum demiratz tzitz. Isn't it because even though this woman has a suffix tumah of being a zava, the tzitz still mitigates her tumah to make it that she was yotzei the korban pesach? So how can you tell me that your reading of the Bryce is to tell me that the tzitz does not mitigate suffix tumas ziva? The Gemara answers, Amri lo, mishum dekasaver Rabbi Yossi mikanu lahabahi metama. The Gemara says, no. It's not because the tzitz mitigates the tumah. You don't need the tzitz in this case. When a woman had a discharge on Monday, and then she's waiting to see what's going to happen on Tuesday, as long as she has not had a second discharge on Tuesday, she's considered to be in a state of tahara. And we're waiting in suspense to see if she will have another discharge. But until she has that discharge, she's okay for today. And if she discharges later on in the day, then from that point onwards we consider her tummy, not retroactively and saying that this is conjoined with the discharge of yesterday to make it that it's one contiguous status of tumah. No, during this interim period, she's tahor because she hasn't had any discharge on Tuesday so far. And that's why we're allowed to bring the korban pesach for her, not because of the tzitz, but rather because her status right now is as a tahor lady. We'll hold it here for today. You have a wonderful day.